Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you're listening to, and welcome to episode 2 of Between Two Bits. Actually, we made it, man. Second episode already.
Yeah, I can't believe they got us again.
So how do we feel after the first one, though?
Relieved that I'm not fired. I really am.
We are running the risk of being canceled, but, well.
No, we still have at least, a budget for an extra 8 episodes-ish?
At least
so we've got 8 more chances to mess around, right?
Maybe a movie. This is tough.
Maybe a movie.
Can we get a consensus on this? So are we data superstars then? Tech superstars? Or we're just 4 guys?
I'm telling you, I'm a tech B-lister.
I think we're just 4 guys. I noticed though, I feel a bit left out. It's like 3 J's and an R. It's like RJ cubed. It's ridiculous. We need another spread of the names. You've got like Jason, Justin, and Joseph, and Richard.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. Doesn't fit.
We could call you Jichard.
Jichard. My niece used to call me Jichard because I won't go into the stories there, but yeah, I've been known as Jichard before.
You're British. We can just say you're James, and everyone's just gonna be, yeah, of course he's James, and then we just go through.
My brother's James. I can't call James. I can't.
James
my grandma. Yeah, my grandmother used to call me James all the time. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And by the way, the viewers can't see, but our producer Jonathan is also a J.
Jonathan is.
This feels like I am actively being left out now. Like this is being done on purpose.
Yeah, by your parents.
That's why Jonathan's doing jumping jacks in the background right now.
We just like you very much that even though your name doesn't fit the mold, we went out of our way to get you on board.
I'll take that. Thanks.
Positive spin.
You're an honorary J, so don't worry about it.
It's a testament to your big brain.
Much.
So just like we had in the first episode, we've got the 4 of us again. I'm Jason. I've got the very lovely Joseph with me. I've got the ever so wonderful Justin, and I've got the honorary J, Richard Hall.
The honorary J, Richard Hall, who I am actually making a statement. I should point this out. It was kind of an accident, but I thought I'd keep it because this has been me today. So I will try and not snap at you guys or be too banterous in a bad way.
At least it's clear. At least we're all on the same page now.
I'm setting it out there. Right? Just beware. Not today.
No, we'll call you Mr. Grumpy then.
Okay, I go with that over the James. Over the James, definitely. Grumpy over James.
So what are we talking about today?
Shall we start introducing our today's topic?
Yeah.
So the first thing we want to discuss is about how data teams are typically organized and how they should be organized. That's an interesting one, isn't it? That's a can of worms on its own, isn't it?
I have to tell you, when I saw what we're going to discuss, the topic, I thought it was some sort of therapy session for me. I was like, oh, they just want me to complain for 45 minutes and just be there for me. I have a lot to be saying on this today.
I feel I have to point out, guys, because of last week's episode, we spent an awful lot of time digging at the IT team, and I kind of get the impression we may be doing that again. And I've got loads of stuff I need them to do. So I just want to say to our IT team, this isn't personal. Honestly, this isn't personal, and I still love you. In fact, I just also like to say, I would argue that the IT team are very much like MI5 or the CIA. You only ever complain about them because when they do the job right, you don't hear about them. So I mean, that's basically how I'm dealing with this situation of worrying IT. I think you're great, guys. I think you're just like MI5. That's what I'm saying.
Did you get death threats or something, Richard? What was that about?
It's not a threat at all. I'm not scared of them at all. Not scared one bit. Please don't know.
It has absolutely nothing to do with the brand new upgrade on his laptop that he just got last week.
He's blinking
Really?
help. He's just blinking help.
No, guys. Honestly, I have actually just ordered a new laptop, so I mean that is an element.
you see what I'm telling you? It's like there's always a hidden agenda.
Just a coincidence.
So
should we get through it?
So data teams, right? Let's start with the first one. Should there be a chief data officer in every organization, tech organization at least?
Oh, you're starting with the big one.
I know, man. It's like
I would say depends on the size of your company, the size of the data team you envision, what you're trying to get out of your data teams. A lot of criteria. How mature is your company? How mature is your analytics team? How mature is your data collection?
I don't necessarily think you can say based on a size that you have to have it. I think surely it has to be based on whether it is needed. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think now as to an organization that wouldn't need a CDO. And because I'm thinking that, I can't think of one at the moment, but I wouldn't like to bet that absolutely every organization earning a certain amount would have to have one. It does have to be, I think, based on what they do.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? If we say CDO, like when you say a CTO, when you say a CIO, we know what value they're bringing to shareholders at the end of the day. You get the end of the quarter, they have something to report. What is a CDO reporting, and who is he reporting it to? I think this is why C-levels exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's also the other added question as well, right? So,
some silence.
Who would report to a CDO?
Yeah, it's both sides, but you can argue for someone in a position of a VP or something in a structure in a product team.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get C-levels, I feel like you owe something to your shareholders. You owe something to the company structure.
Well, I'm going to take a different road on this. Just say that every company that uses data, that is running any kind of analytics for anything, and maybe even if they're not, needs to have that role. The role. Now, it may not be, you may not be a large enough organization to have a CDO title sitting in the ivory tower. However, someone needs to be identifying what data the company has, how they can use it, how they can solve problems with it, and really focused on that. Because when we think about business objectives or business needs, this person should be focused on that, but also this white space, like how do we minimize attrition and those kinds of things. And there are ways that you can use data to do that. So there needs to be somebody who has, as part of their role, hey, identify what data we've got, identify how we can use data. And I would say that applies to almost any organization.
Because then let's say, right, so would that be a chief data officer or someone like a chief analytics officer?
Yeah.
But it could also be a CIO, right? The chief information officer.
Or a CTO. I mean, depending on how big or small your organization is, other chiefs in the organization will be covering those tasks anyway.
So are we trying to say that C-levels are oversubscribed? Aha.
I just think that
I want to say that I really like my job and I feel very good.
You think about the CDO role. I mean, those you need to call out those things as being something that somebody handles. And CIO, there's a lot of other things the CIO can do, including things like infrastructure and hardware and all that, that kind of thing. So,
but that can also go down as a CDO, right? Because you're not looking at data just on the data itself. So is the CDO position mainly sort of like a governance kind of position?
This is the question, isn't it? This is the question, isn't it? Because I was just saying that there's a lot of crossover. So a CTO, CIO, CDO, there's a lot of potential crossover between each of those roles. So it's really defining where it stops and you don't cross over. I guess I wouldn't expect a CDO to be dealing with hardware at all. Maybe what was on the hardware potentially, but maybe not even that, maybe just the data. How is that decided? Is it a standard or is it done per organization and decided amongst the team?
The question would be, should you start from the top or should you build your data teams from the bottom up. You're starting with your data engineers and data analysts, and then seeing what the structure needs on top? Or do you start with a CDO and then you say, look, get your requirements, get your teams, see how you can leverage internal information? Which way does it go?
So with the chief data officer, would you say maybe that the chief data officer should be more like a CDIO, so chief data and information officer, and encompass each of the different areas of, let's say, infosec, analytics, data engineering?
I would feel that more likely companies that are already not having this structure in place would start at the bottom level. They would start with engineers, with analysts, rather than having directly someone in charge of governing a certain section of the enterprise. That would be my view of it.
I like what you said, though. Go ahead, Richard.
So I was going to say, were you saying then that you'd start the organization with maybe a small team of people that are building up, and then you get to a point where it's decided, right, at this point, we need a CDO to drive or to steer the course. But prior to that, we've had a team of individuals that have worked together. Because I don't necessarily disagree, but doesn't that then lead to a situation where you've got these guys that have evolved a situation together, how they work together, and then suddenly you bring somebody in, because let's face it, C-levels are never, or very rarely, come from within the organization. They're usually parachuted in. So then the CDO comes along and says, right, interesting what you've done there, guys, but I'm going to change it all because it's not my way. Because that's a bit of a problem, I think, when you get into those sorts of situations.
But wouldn't that require a certain level of maturity, you think, before you get to that level? And maybe not all companies, especially when they have smaller sizes, they don't have that level of maturity when it comes to data. I think we know that firsthand ourselves.
What do you think?
There's some top-down things. Like, if you think about, I think you brought up a good point about governance. Maybe governance is the starting place, and you just say, it's got to be somebody's responsibility to know what data we have. Like, just simply what's out there. Because, for most organizations, you've got customers, you might have some information about your customers, and that can get you in trouble. Just that alone. So, maybe it's as simple as that's kind of the starting place. And I think that is, generally speaking, a top-down thing. 2 cents.
Governance requires having a structure in place, right? Requires having something already in place to govern. So this is why I went with the approach of saying maybe it goes from the bottom up. And as you said, it might come as a shock that someone is parachuted in and completely changes the entire course or changes the way things are done. But I have a hard time, aside from very large enterprises, seeing companies adopting a CDO out of the gate.
Then also consider this, right? How many of us have actually seen projects or have been part of projects, and this happens all the time, where everything just gets turned upside down? We get to a point where you've had years of working in certain ways, they've developed certain processes, and then we say, oh guys, we realize we've done it wrongly, or we need to optimize our efficiency, and then it's like crap, that's an extra 6 months.
It's natural though. You reach a point where you have to scale, and a lot of times when you hit that tipping point, you've just got to reinvent the wheel. And I'm not saying it's that way all the time. But I think it's common.
So should you start off with a CDO then, regardless of the size of the organization?
I see where you're getting at. Yes, I see a lot of companies, a lot of projects get restarted from scratch, rebuilt, nuked, and completely rebuilt again all the time. It's part of working in engineering, I guess. Theoretically, yes, you should have more, but go on.
Doesn't this sort of back up the argument that there are maybe certain C-level roles where it is actually better if you have come from the organization and progressed up. So maybe you were part of a smaller team that have started building this, and then somebody out of that team has evolved the process so much and understands it implicitly that they can then start leading from the top. They built up that experience. Because I keep going back to this because I have seen this in a couple of different organizations I've worked for, where people have come in, and I'm not necessarily talking just about CDOs here, but they've come in and they've made a change just because they felt, I'm new, I have to make a change. I have to make it work in my way, and this has to be my way and not the old way, because otherwise I won't be seen to have done anything. So I think that's the thing that I'm really sort of questioning as to whether, when it comes to that sort of role where you do need to understand the company's data and how it works and what it's used for and all of the nooks and crannies that it goes into, then maybe it is actually better to have that evolve from the inside rather than having somebody parachuted in.
Interestingly, when I used to work in banking, specifically in risk, okay, where we talk about technology risk, talking about credit risk and all the other kind of risk management there, we always used to say, and even in anti-fraud, we used to say, right, if someone comes in, the first 6 months of any role in risk and anti-fraud is always sit down and listen. Mm-hmm. Sit down, see how the organization is working, see what the business is doing, understand what's happening. And then after about 6 month period, we're able to soak that in. No, you start looking at how am I going to optimize the process. But you think with C-levels, because of the level, or even within data, because of this need to be agile, we run into these kind of issues where the changes are happening at a much faster pace, without actually soaking in the way the organization works. I know it's a bit of a controversial point, that one,
Yeah, I think you come in as a C-level. You come in with expectations. You come in with you've come to do a job, and you have to prove yourself, I think, quite quickly. You're under a lot more pressure than someone else in the organization. So I don't know if you can sit and listen and hear. It's ideal, yes. Is it feasible? I think I would agree with Richard on this more.
What you're saying, Jason, was how it should work, in my opinion. You can't go into any environment at all, and go in there, and unless it's brand new, which this wouldn't be, but you can't go into any environment and suddenly know everything better than everybody else that's been working there and make the right changes every time. You do need to go in, sit down and investigate, understand, and then work with the team that are already there to come up with the best, most optimum solution, surely.
So can I ask something to all of you now that we've reached to this point? What's more important for the data team? Is it to, as we said, the governance, to know what the internal data is? Or is it more, what data are we interested in finding? Or what data reaches it? What business objectives are we trying to achieve with our data? So which of those two facets is the most important thing, you think, for data team?
I think they serve two purposes. I mean, from a compliance perspective, you need to know what you've got, or at least most companies would. But, if you're talking about the value of data, I mean, absolutely, you're just focused on the business objectives and understanding that data and, how it can be used within the context of the company. And just going back to what you guys were just saying, I think Richard brought up a great point. I think the CDO might be one of those rare sort of executive positions that someone can grow into because they understand the landscape of the data, and it puts you at a really extreme disadvantage, especially if you are advantage. If you grow from a company that is 50 people to a company that's 1,000 people. I mean, think about how much and how many rocks you've already overturned.
So you think the knowledge of the internal structure and internal data is the most important part to a chief data officer role?
Not necessarily, but I think these other roles, understanding the business, understanding where the right data is, looking for new opportunities with the data that, again, those things that the responsibilities of the CDO without even being called a CDO. It might be one person, it might be a team of people that are doing this on a small scale. But then at some point, you grow large enough to formalize that. And now it's somebody's full-time job to do those things. I just think it's an opportunity. It might be one of those things where, it really makes a lot of sense to grow someone into that position rather than, try to fly somebody in.
It feels like we're trying to get an internal job in our companies. Please, the companies we work for, if you are planning to have a CDO, definitely you should hire internally. This is what we're saying.
Yeah.
I know a very qualified group of individuals who are very, very well versed in data. Love to help you.
Somehow I'm getting this whole meme of the dog sitting down in the fire going, this is fine.
This is fine.
Yeah. And I think it might change our appraisals in the next 2 or 3 months as well. After this episode gets aired.
We're good there though, because we've all just had it done. We've got a year, so we've got enough time to clean up our act after this. We've got plenty of time. Carry on.
You just actually made me realize that I'm still on probation for the next 2 months.
Careful.
I love you guys. I'm just going to say that. Please remember me. So going back to the teams, right? How should they be organized? Oh, this is going to... If you could build out the organization from C-level down, encompassing each of the data roles, and let's throw a curveball in there. InfoSec, information security, IT security. Mm-hmm. Should that be part of the CDO's remit? Should that be something completely separate?
I personally would think it's something that is completely separate, in my opinion. Especially if we look at the recent vulnerabilities that have been detected in the industry worldwide. It's mostly come through defective libraries rather than data leaks. I feel like that we have two segments on the whole data story. But when it comes to, for me, security InfoSec team, it's mostly also about all the integrations that the applications have with each other. It's more closely tied either to a separate team or to the engineering team rather than a data team. It's
interesting because I think you could put it into both categories. I actually do think it's one of those areas where maybe there is a bit of crossover. The InfoSec team has a dotted line to maybe the CTO and the CDO or other chief officers, because it does cover several different areas, but it's still all security. It's all to do with the same sort of thing. So I think that is one of those sort of different areas where it would be difficult to put it into a bucket, I think. As long as they can stop playing around with my email and sending me those phishing tests, I'm fine.
I think you're dissenting to dissent.
The phishing tests make an appearance every episode. This is our running gag, is the phishing test.
I couldn't resist that.
It's like you open up, "Hi, Richard. I'm a fish."
But then it poses the question: do we need a chief information security officer? Are they the same organization? Is a data organization encompassing the security team?
I personally think that in terms of C-levels, there should be a CISO, which, following sort of what happens in banking with risk specifically, a CISO that actually reports directly to the board as opposed to reporting into the CEO. That's my personal take on it. Because risk is one of those things which a CEO shouldn't be allowed to override any risk within an organization. Is something which should be discussed at board level. Is my personal belief, Usually, for example, in banks we have risk committees within boards as well, and the CRO, the chief risk officer at that point, and even the CISO in many kind of organizations usually reports up to the risk committees, which are completely separate to the C-level organization, right?
I worked for a company where the risk committee reported to the board, not even to the
Directly.
CEO.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That was their readout.
So we keep the CISO, let's say, onto the risk committee or that higher up direct report to the board. What about the rest of the organization? Would we have a CIO, CDO as a joint role? So like a CDIO, or would it just be a CDO? Because at the end of the day, it's all data, right? And information is just structured data in a certain way, right? Semantically structured data, I would probably add.
Yeah, but the same would go. Can't you just have a CIO that is more of a data governance body as well? So the question goes both ways. This is mostly with the titles. This is why in the beginning I tried to refrain from the C levels and mostly focus on the, because you can call it CDO, you can call it CIO, CDIO, CISO, and I think you can mix and match these teams together.
You can call it director.
You can call it director of data.
But that's the really difficult thing about this conversation, isn't it? Because at different organizations, they do have different remits. So a CTO at one organization will cover absolutely everything. And in another organization, it will be the CIO that does essentially the same job. So it covers the same buckets, but they've got a different title. I think this is where I struggle a little bit, because when we mention these acronyms, I then have to think, what examples do I have in my head of people that have done that acronym, that acronym, that acronym? And there's so much crossover, so much that, because I guess it's all evolving. And also I think because to some extent, it's just another C level. We can just fit another chief in there somewhere. I'm not saying all organizations do that, but seen examples of that happening. And it does make it very difficult to talk about. There does need to be a real definition, a strong definition for each of them, I think, across the industry. And that's what we don't have.
I mean, you can find definitions out there, but I think ultimately it boils down to identifying the types of things that we're talking about. And specifically, we're talking, we start with CDO, we're talking about data today. And I think, you've got to look at, strategically, how are you going to use your data? From a risk and compliance standpoint, how are you going to use your data? And just make sure that someone's covering those bases, no matter what three letters.
So let's say you have the CIO, CDO at the top, right? One or the other, depending on the type of organization. If we take it another level down, what teams would report to those? Probably the data governance team being one of them, maybe.
Yeah, for me, there are multiple facets to the data story. So you have the teams, the engineers that are building. Because now we're all assuming that the data is available to be used, but that also needs to be put in place to have the data available. And then you have people to analyze the data analysis team, and then you have, of course, a governance team. So I think it's the three facets. So you have the engineering side, you have the analytical side, and you have the governance side to the story.
So Joseph, do you see the analytics group rolling up to a CDO if there's a CDO at the company?
Definitely. I think that's definitely, because as you said, the objective, the main raison d'être, as they say in French, for the CDO is to say, we need to know how to leverage our information, our data. I need to know what to make of it and how to use it. So for me, that really boils down to the analytics team, which will have the tools and the means to make that happen.
How about governance?
For sure. I think that's what I said. It's the three, as you said, under the CDO for me is three main categories, and it's governance, analytics, and of course the engineering side of making sure the data is there, collected, structured somewhat, and available to be used.
So if there's no CDO, what do you see?
If there's no CDO, I would imagine it's groups inside the engineering department or R&D department, and this is where we lose the plot, because without a single vision for all three groups, you're hardly gonna get any business-driven data anywhere. because you have to organize those three categories in order to really make sense and leverage the data you have. And if you don't have a single structure. Yeah.
So coming up at the time now. Closing comments. What is the one thing you would say about this topic? You know, and let's not be grumpy about it, Richard. Come on, smile. You're fine. You know, let's think of what kind of best practices, or what kind of what we believe should be a best practice we can impart for this, right?
Let's start with you. I've got to go back to that. You're telling me to smile. Okay, I do have a classic case of resting bitch face. So when I'm interested, I'm just paying attention. I look bored, or I look at that's. I'm enjoying this. So I apologise for that. And I've forgotten the question you asked. Can you ask it again?
I would say to my point is that, as I said, the three pillars of having the data collection story, the analytics, and the governance need to be under one umbrella. You can call it whatever you want, put it whatever you need, but they need to be driven by one company objective goal to align those three together and really be able to leverage company data. And without that, I think the plot is a bit lost.
Justin?
Final thoughts. They gave that championship to Max Verstappen.
You're never letting it go.
You are going to make Jason cry.
No, I mean, I think this.
Let's talk about controversy here. If Massey had the data or all the data around it, would he have made the same decision or not?
Yes, because Christian Horner wouldn't leave him alone.
No, Richard, no. It's called motor racing. We went car racing.
Going back to CDO.
It's called motor racing, Toto. It's motor racing. Get off your high horse, Toto. It's motor racing.
You started.
For anyone who hasn't followed, we're looking at the last episode of Drive to Survive season 4. So.
Well, no. Those true F1 fans are looking at watching the whole race and every other race of the season. It's the American fans that only watch Drive to Survive, Justin.
You're right, and I will. I'm going to go out and look for this stuff because I can probably subscribe to a channel that'll get it for me. So I will do that just for you guys.
Okay.
So what about the data?
Richard, come on. Yeah. The honorary J.
The honorary J. My final thoughts on this. I don't think this is going to be a subject I'm ever going to get to the bottom of. As I said, it's one of those things that I think keeps evolving, and there will be new groups coming up all the time that we'll be then looking into to say, how does it fit? But I do know that, going back to what Joseph said about where would these three core groups that he put together under the CDO fit, at the moment, you can fit each of those in almost a completely different organization. So I think I'm not going to put a firm position on this. I think it's very fluid, and I'll see what I think in every instance that I see, to be perfectly honest. That's a big get out. I'm running away from answering the question, but I'm gonna sit on the fence on this one and say it's up in the air for me.
Jason, I will actually go back to the CDO and just say that I do think that those responsibilities are relatively new to the world. And I think that every company needs to think about those responsibilities and really think about identifying the data and trying to do a better job of understanding how the data can impact the business and accelerate the business, regardless of whether they have a CDO, and have someone who is tasked with thinking about those things.
I mean, I'll echo, as my final thoughts, I'll echo your comments on that. Yeah. So whether it's a CDO or CIO, the important thing is that we are living in a world where just a few years ago, we were talking about bytes and megabytes, and now we're talking about gigabytes and terabytes, and pretty in the next 5 to 10 years, we're looking at the most minimal thing that we're going to look at is going to be petabytes and exabytes, That's pretty much the kind of world is going. So before we get to that point, understand the data, make sure that there is someone who is tasked with being sort of the gatekeeper of the data within an organization, because that's your goal at the end of the day, right? So we're going to move next to Richard. Did we ever even choose a name? Is it still Job of the Week? Crazy quirky jobs? Rate by pipeline?
But no, we don't have a new name for it at the moment. So it is going to stick with the Job of the Week. And this week's Job of the Week, or this month's, depending on how often we put these out, is going to be based on getting near to real-time Twitter data. And I'll be using this at the weekend. Justin, you might be interested, to analyze the tweets that occur during the Australian Grand Prix, because that's the kind of cool stuff I do at the weekend. So I'll be sharing that work with you guys in the next section.
Welcome to the second Job of the Week video. This video will be focusing on retrieving Twitter data in near to real time using a Talend route and a Talend job. First, you will need a Twitter account and will need access to the Twitter developer portal. Go to developer.twitter.com, then click sign up here. But as I'm a member, I will go straight through to my dashboard by clicking this. Here you can see my Talend on Talend project. You will also see my Talend Twitter search app and my Talend route Twitter app, the one I am showing you today. Now let's go to my Talend on Talend project. This is where you can edit and modify the apps you've created within the project. This is where you can add your new app, but I'll be editing mine to show you how it's configured. Here you can see the app name, the app ID, description, environment, and the authentication settings. We won't be doing too much with these, since we will generate keys and tokens that we can use for ourselves here. Here you can see the API key and secret regenerate button, the bearer token, we won't be using this, and the access token and secret regenerate button. To start with, we'll regenerate our API key and secret codes. I won't be keeping these constant when I share this job. Here we can see the API key and the API key secret. I'll start by clicking the copy button of the API key, and then I'll copy this to a text pad for use later. Next, I'll do the same thing with the API key secret. This can take a bit of time, but once it's done, click the Yes, I saved them button. Once this is done, we will do exactly the same thing with the access token and secret codes. This time, we will click on the copy button of the access token and copy it to a text file. We will then do the same with the access token secret copy button. All of these codes need to be kept in a safe place, but if you lose them, you can of course regenerate them. As before, we click Yes, I save them to exit. Now we're done here, so let's go over to our Talend route. As with last time, I'm using Talend Open Studio ESB version 8. Let's open the route. This is a very simple route, but before we start looking at the components, let's look at the context variables. Let me just expand everything so that we can see. Here we have the consumer key and the consumer secret, or the API key and the API key secret. The access token secret, Twitter query, which is a string query which we would use to search Twitter. We also have file path. This is for the location of the file we want to store the data in. You can use anything to store the data in Talend, but I chose to make it simple by using a file. Here are all of the keys that I stored on a text pad earlier. They have all been copied into the context variables. Now let's take a look at our components. We have a C messaging endpoint, a C processor, and a C Talend job. First, the C messaging endpoint. There is a nice trick you can do here to bring up the Talend help for all Talend components. Simply click on the component and hit F1. This will load the correct help page to your browser. Here you will find everything you need to know about the C messaging endpoint. First, let's look at the advanced settings of the C messaging endpoint. Here we need to set the Twitter camel component. To do this, we click the green button and then we go through the list of included camel components. We've already got it set here, so this is just an example. Now let's take a look at the URI in our basic settings. It's a little bit cramped here, so let's take a look at what I've copied onto my text pad so that we can analyze it. This URI is made up of hard-coded text and context variables. Here we have the Twitter search endpoint, our Twitter query context variable, our count parameter set to 100, number of pages set to 1, a delay set to 5500 milliseconds, filter old set to true. Then we set consumer key to our context variable. Consumer secret, access token, and access token secret are set likewise. Let's look at the Apache Camel component documentation. This is really useful with Talend routes. Go to camel.apache.org/components, then search for the component you want on the left-hand side. We've gone for Twitter search. This documentation will help you to understand the URI we have put together and also help you modify it if you feel the need in the future. It can take a bit of getting used to, but is incredibly beneficial to put the effort in. Back to our route. The next component to look at is the C processor component. This is where we extract the Twitter data from the messages received. For this, we will use the Twitter4j functionality, as this is what is used by the Twitter camel component. First, we get the in message from the exchange using the first line of code. Next, we will create a Twitter4j status object called tweet. This will be used to read the Twitter data. Anything we need to know about the tweet can be gathered from the tweet object here. For the rest, we use the message object we created first and assign headers with our tweet values using the next 5 lines of code. We have tweet text from tweet.getText, tweet ID from tweet.getID, tweet date from tweet.getCreatedAt, tweet username from tweet.getuser.getName, and tweet user screen name from tweet.getUser.getScreenName. Our next and last component of the route is the C Talend job component. It makes use of the write tweets to file job that I have written for this. You can see this in the project menu, here. This component is used to enable our route data to be passed to the job it calls. You can see that I am passing our filepath context variable value from the route to a context called filepath in the job. Let's take a look at the job. This job is very simple. It is made up of a troute input, which is used for collecting our data. We are also using a tfile output delimited. This will write our Twitter data to a file in CSV format. See that it uses a context variable called filepath. You can see it in the job's context window. Remember, this is a different variable to the one in the route. Let's take a look at where this is passed again by looking at our route. Here we see the context being passed. And back to the same named context variable in our job. As I said, the troute input is used to bring in our data. To do that, we need to first create a schema. As you will see, I've created 5 columns: tweet text, tweet ID, tweet date, tweet username, and tweet user screen name. Pay attention to set a suitable date format when using dates, otherwise you may lose important data like seconds, for example. Finally, we'll look at how the columns in the schema are set using the Apache Camel simple expression language. While I point to each of these settings, let me explain. What we're doing here is requesting the in header container of the message. We are then selecting each of the named headers. So we're requesting the in part of the message, we want a header, and then we want, for example, the tweet user screen name header. Now that we're done here, let's save this job, let's go back to the root, and let's try and run it and see what we get. Let's resize the window and go to the Run tab. This route will need to compile and this might take a few seconds, so let's click Run and start this going. What we were expecting is to see the metrics which will be shown above the root 1 and root 2 labels to start growing. This will happen every 5.5 seconds. After it has run for a few calls, we will stop it and check the output file. Remember, roots aren't batch like jobs are. They will run forever, so you will need to stop this. So here we can see the first and second load of tweets found. Let's wait for a couple more and then stop. Okay, this appears to be going quite well. We've seen quite a few tweets come through in a few seconds. I'll stop this now, and now we can look at the file that's been produced. Over to the file. So in the first row, we can see the header. We have tweet text, tweet ID, tweet date, tweet username, and tweet user screen name. Let's look at one of the tweet records. You'll notice that records can appear over more than one row and are contained within double quotes. This first column is the tweet text. We then have the tweet ID, the date column, the username, and the user screen name. As I said, the records will be over multiple rows in some cases. You will also see emojis included, as you can see here. So here we have seen a root made up of 3 components, making use of a job with 2 components. Really quite simple, but potentially incredibly useful. As before, this route will be available for you to download. If you have any questions, please feel free to come to Talend Community and ask for R Hall for help.
Perfect. So thank you guys for today. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in to this episode. Let's say.
Can I say one last thing now that you?
Yeah.
Are we changing the podcast name every year, saying between 2 bytes and then do we get to exabytes, or is that every season is an increase in the size of the bits?
It was bits, now it's bytes.
Now it's bytes going through. We never know. Please renew us.
I was going to ask Jason, the years after that, then what kind of data volumes are we looking at?
To be honest, I don't know. I'd probably go exabytes.
What's bigger than an exabyte?
Yeah, I was actually I was having this kind of a conversation with an SI, and I was having this about 2 days ago. He's like, yeah, because we're working with organizations now that are trying to integrate exabytes of data, and let me just go. Let's see if I just Google name of sizes of data. So after terabyte, we have obviously petabyte. Then we have exabyte. Then we have zettabyte, or 1 sextillion, or yottabyte, which is 1 septillion. And they're not even going any further. So
we already have a ceiling for now.
So that's up to 7, which means we have 7 full seasons before we run out of names for the podcast. That's
7 seasons and a movie.
Team quite crazy, isn't it? And Jonathan, our producer in the background, is going, no, keep it.
No promises.
He's thinking, do we have the budget for that? Because I think the budget should go up in the same rate as the the rate in which you go from bits to bytes to petabytes. Maybe if the budget went up at the same rate, then we could do quite well out of this, guys.
I agree.
Jonathan's really worried now, isn't he? He's thinking, I'm never going to get that money from...
Let's break the 100 views first, then the 200, 300, and let's work at it that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
However, let's put this, if we get 500 likes, we'll have to come up with, we'll do a crazy thing together on camera.
We're gonna start a merch store where we sell "I don't like people" shirts. This is what we should do. This is how it's done.